Frontline. Today we'll talk about resilient recovery and learning from COVID-19. My name is Francis Guesquer. I'm the practice manager for urban development and disaster risk management at the World Bank for the East Asia region, and I'm your co-host for this speaker series on behalf of the World Bank. Lauren had a conflict, so Dana will actually introduce the topic of our 5 guest speakers in a minute. But before we start, let me, as is now tradition, remind everyone of the intention of this speaker series and the ground rule for the conversation. The purpose of these webinars is to have open and honest learning conversations. The calls are not on the record, and we ask that you not attribute any comment unless you have the person's express permission to do so. We will help you obtain this permission if needed. We have about 450 people registered for the call today, so to facilitate the discussion, we ask that you use the Q&A function or the chat function to ask questions or provide comments. Please note that the recording of this session, as well as any PowerPoint presentation, will be made available online starting next Monday. Dana, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dana Amran, and it's a pleasure to be co-hosting this session today on behalf of Resilient Cities Network. We are very excited to be jumping into a session with lots of great speakers today. Today's session is co-hosted also by the German Agency for International Cooperation, GIZ, who are helping to partner with us and our ICLEI on a program around planning for a resilient recovery in 3 countries, in Mauritania, and Bangladesh, and Rwanda. So as we've embarked on this work, we've been doing a lot of deep thinking as a group of partners on what it means to be co-designing a resilient recovery in partnership with city governments. Felix Döhler from GIZ will be co-hosting the session and will be kicking us off with some remarks. We'll also be joined by several other speakers, including Soo-Jin Kim, who's the head of the Urban Policies and Reviews Unit and Deputy Head for Cities, Urban Policies and Sustainable Development at the OECD. Our second speaker after Soo-Jin will be Dr. Andrew McClelland, a research associate at the University of Manchester. The third speaker will be Eliara Giuliani, Deputy Chief Resilience Officer and from the Environmental Transition Department at the Municipality of Milan. And finally, our partners from ICLEI will be represented through Dr. Nazmul Haq, who is the head of Resilient Development Program at ICLEI. And so we're very excited for a robust conversation today. I'll hand it off to you, Felix, to kick us off, and looking forward to hearing more from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dana. My name is Felix Döhler. I'm the head of component on climate and finance in the sector program Cities of GIZ in Bonn. We advise the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ, the division in charge of cities, mobility and circular economy, on everything urban, you might say. My specific angles are municipal finance, climate protection and adaptation, local implementation of global agendas, and also urban resilience. Beyond our policy advisory work, we actively stay in touch with our projects in cities all over the world. Some 20 to 30% of GIZ projects can be considered urban. It's a particular honor to co-host this webinar, as we've been working to raise the issue of green recovery and resilience in cities for a while now. Urban resilience, in the narrower sense of climate and disaster resilience, had already gained acknowledgement in the international climate debate and also in our work. With the last year's pandemic, we saw an opportunity rising to widen the angle. And as most of you who are joining this call as listeners and contributors, we've been asking ourselves, what roles can cities play in shaping sustainable reconstruction after the COVID-19 crisis? What can they do in the short term, in the long term, and what can we do as an organization to help them? And it was obvious cities at the beginning of the pandemic were on the front line as communicators, as crisis managers. They were hit hard as service providers, losing important revenues during lockdown. And they had to reorganize themselves. So our question was, how can we potentially support cities' green recovery and their role as key actors? Some preliminary answers was, of course, to use the crisis as an opportunity for transformation, to look at government stimulus packages that might be channeled in a more integrated and sustainable way at the city level. But we've seen some limitations to this, and to work in city planning and city economy towards a double dividend of coupling short-term response measures to COVID-19 with a sustainable orientation of the economic reconstruction. So when we looked around of what we could do, we saw many able actors already. Firstly, Resilient Cities Network, our cities as a pool of expertise, and was very clear they are playing an important role for knowledge transfer and to transfer knowledge from peer to peer. And this webinar series together with the World Bank was obviously already a very important contribution in this sense. But also the city level itself is very important, and it's to understand the implications for your own city. It's always very important to understand a comprehensive case. So I'm also looking forward to the contribution from Milan to have this detailed example that one can refer to. Then also what's very important, obviously, is the frameworks. And in the sense, I'm looking forward to the OECD presentation. Where are the right frameworks set? What can we learn from pandemic responses in different countries at the city level, for the city level? Yes, and gathering the knowledge and systematizing it is as important as the University of Manchester is doing. Last but not least, the work of membership-based organizations such as ICLEI, who develop tools and carry out projects and also bring the knowledge gain to the table in international processes are very important. So back to the question, what can we do as GIZ? We've been asking ourselves what we can do, and there are elements of all of these elements are figure in our work to some extent. We fortunately gained the support from BMZ for a very short-term program in this year to support 5 municipalities in 3 countries, Rwanda, Bangladesh, and Mauritania, to pilot a few approaches. And the program runs only until the end of the year. And so we decided on a few small approaches, that is green recovery planning using the methodologies of GIZ, of ICLEI, and the Resilient Cities Network in one package to strengthen the resilience planning at the local level, to pilot small-scale measures that can be arguable contribution towards green recovery, and to develop project proposals for funding pipelines. Our project is about learning. How can we mainstream green recovery and broader resilience approaches into our own work better? And we'll put the methodological learnings on our websites. And there's a small advertisement break. On the 14th of October, there will be a second webinar in this series where we will talk about this in more detail. But for now, I'm very glad to be here and listen to the contributions of the speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Felix. Soo-Jin Kim, Soo-Jin, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me. Greetings from Paris, where I am based, and while I put my slides on the screen, so since March 2020 at the OECD, we have been monitoring how different cities in OECD countries and beyond have been confronting the pandemic and shaping their way out of it, or I should say probably learning to live with it and emerging stronger from it. So today here I will focus on three main observations or questions, let's say. The first one is how bad was the crisis for cities? The second one is what are some of the things that all cities are doing to overcome the crisis and should do about it? And I'll finish with the third question, which is what still remains to be done and the next steps. So on the first question of how bad the crisis was, I guess today we're actually meeting in a context where the prospects for global growth and global recovery as a whole are actually much better than they were a few months ago. In fact, just 2 days ago, the OECD published its updated projections for economic growth in 2021 and 2022. And in fact, in many countries, as you can see here, we expect growth to be back somewhere between generally 5% and 7% for this year, potentially a bit less for next year, but overall the global picture is actually getting brighter. But the important point is that this recovery is actually extremely uneven, both across different countries, but also most importantly within countries, because the crisis has actually hit in a very asymmetrical way. And if you look at the map that appeared on the right, we estimate that the share of jobs that were at risk of disappearing due to lockdowns and all the related restrictions were actually somewhere between 15% and 35% of jobs in most OECD regions. But this share was actually often higher in cities, and particularly large cities, especially those cities that were relying very heavily on, for example, tourism, global trade, retail, etc. The good news, because there is good news, is that cities were also generally much better equipped than more rural and remote regions to address the crisis due to a number of reasons. But one example that I could flag here is that they were overall digitally much more equipped. And so they were able to maintain a good part of their economy through remote working. So for example, in the city of Paris, where I live, we estimate that around half of jobs can be worked from home, compared to, let's say, only 30% in the region of Basse Normandie in France, which is much more rural. So all in all, of course, cities have taken a really big blow from the crisis, but they also have a very strong capacity and strong potential to overcome it in many different ways. Now, turning to my second point, which is about how cities are addressing the crisis, and this will be no secret to all of you. Since day one of the pandemic, really, mayors and their teams have been taking a myriad of different actions, and some of them cannot be replicated exactly as such from one place to the other. You always have to take into account the local context. But if we try to categorize them or to see what is really emerging as a common pattern across the different cities in OECD countries, you could say that many of those actions are actually building on major transitions that were already underway before the pandemic, but got really accelerated and are aiming to build resilience in the long term, not just with this crisis, but also trying to better prepare cities for future crises, because sadly there will be many more. So One example of such a transition is, of course, the digital transition and how cities are aiming for a smart recovery. So many cities have been investing in digital technologies, and some of them have been particularly effective and pioneering in this field. So, for example, Seoul in Korea had actually established a smart data hub before the pandemic for other, urban planning purposes, but was able to leverage this digital hub for, contact tracing and to monitor how the virus is spreading and to be able to warn people. So many other cities are also now investing or accelerating their investments in digital technologies to be able to, design this smarter recovery out of the crisis. A second transition is, of course, the climate transition, the green transition, and basically going towards a low carbon and more circular economy in cities. So a very visible example is this momentum for softer types of urban mobility, such as cycling lanes that have proliferated in many cities, and they're sometimes even called Corona lanes in some cities, such as Medellin or Bogota. In Paris, I certainly see a lot of those cycling lanes. But more generally, cities are really transitioning and shifting towards, different types of more sustainable urban development, including sometimes shifting the way that citizens are consuming and trying to consume more locally. So, for example, fresh produce that was produced locally in the rural areas immediately surrounding those big cities. And a third type of transition that I wanted to flag here, which is perhaps a little bit less talked about, but I think the crisis has really shown a very harsh light on this transition. It's really about the inequalities and how the crisis has shown how unequal we are within cities, for example, in terms of our housing conditions, our capacity to shift and digitally and to use technologies, and also how vulnerable small businesses are compared to bigger ones. And so many cities have been, providing targeted support to the most vulnerable parts of the city, most vulnerable citizens and businesses. And they're now trying to mainstream this into their broader urban strategy. And so, for example, you've got examples in Vienna, for example, for social housing, or Frankfurt supporting SMEs. And so all these actions are really trying to make cities better fit for future shocks. And when you weave these three big types of transitions and actions together, you really have to revisit the urban vision and the long-term strategy for development. And a few examples that I wanted to show here are actually focused on this concept of proximity and accessibility. So how cities are trying to make goods and services and opportunities just more accessible to people in a radius of 10 minutes as in Brussels, or 15 minutes as in Paris, 20 minutes as in Melbourne. But basically these are visions that were not necessarily developed with the pandemic. In many cases, like in Melbourne and the others, they were developed before the pandemic. But with the COVID-19 crisis, these these visions are really coming to the fore and are gaining momentum to refocus the vision for development. But of course, there is still a long way to go for cities, and this is my third and final point. Because we can't wait, of course, to be done with the COVID-19 pandemic to address all those emergencies tackling cities, the climate emergency, the inequalities emergency, the housing crisis, etc. And one of the frameworks that I think can really help cities, keep track of those different challenges, different objectives within a coherent strategy is really the Sustainable Development Goals. And cities do have a critical role to play here. In fact, we estimate that 65% of the SDG targets will not be achieved without this active engagement from cities and local governments. And in this respect, the OECD metrics that we have on where do we stand? Where do our cities stand in terms of achieving the SDGs? Show, unfortunately, that there is a lot of distance to go to meet those targets in cities. Here, I just put the example of Bonn, courtesy of GIZ. And so where you see, in blue dots, where the city of Bonn is standing and how much ground we still have to cover. So in a nutshell, to conclude, cities have done, above and beyond, of course. They do have a lot of potential to overcome the crisis and to help, their country as a whole recover from the crisis. But there is still quite a lot of work to be done. And this is what we are trying to do to help cities at the OECD. So we're providing this targeted support to different cities and regions. So if your own city is interested in engaging with us, please don't hesitate, of course, to get in touch. And I'll finish here. I really look forward to hearing more about the specific examples of cities and experiences that we have on this panel. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Soo-Jin. I'll hand it off to Dr. Andrew McClelland from the University of Manchester. Andrew, looking forward to hearing from you.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction and the kind invitation to speak on today's event. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm working at the University of Manchester, but based in neighbouring Liverpool. And I'm currently a member of the interdisciplinary team working on the Recovery, Renewal and Resilience project, as I mentioned, based at the University of Manchester. But we've really been working with a broad range of multi-sectoral partners across the world since the project officially began in January of this year. In terms of today's presentation, I really just want to give you a brief glimpse at some of the outworkings of our project to date, and I'll talk about some of the range of activities and outputs that we've been engaged with developing. This is an ongoing project running until the summer of 2022. So clearly a lot of research still has to be undertaken and a lot of analysis will obviously emerge from that. Nonetheless, as you can see from the infographic on the screen, and two of our broad overarching focal points I will briefly touch upon today. And you can see under those a really broad range of activities that we've been involved in to date. And obviously by the end of the project, those will have multiplied significantly. Today, I will focus on both the Manchester briefing and also on our work on developing a recovery framework. And much of our work has really been focused on local governments and local agencies around the world as they think towards the recovery from the pandemic. In terms of the Manchester briefing, obviously we've been delighted to partner with the Resilient Cities Network in the rapid dissemination of lessons relating to response and recovery in the context of the pandemic. And obviously the Manchester briefing has been one of the key vehicles through which we have sought to rapidly disseminate these lessons around the world. In terms of the original incarnation of the Manchester briefing, we've now launched 42 of these since the COVID crisis began. And we like to think that the Manchester briefings have really greatly assisted local government and other agencies in terms of thinking towards their recovery and renewal efforts. To date, we have almost 600 lessons, and since the summer, those lessons have been gathered together in an online database, which is fully searchable and available for anyone to access around the world. And I will give you the link to that database in the final slide. Another key aspect of the project has been thinking about, through some of our wider empirical research in particular, the type of development of multidimensional frameworks that can really aid local agencies as they think about their strategies for recovery. You can see on the screen one of the framework that we have been developing, and this is something which we believe can really assist those who are designing and also implementing their recovery plans and renewal strategies. So this has very much been developed through our desktop, our empirical research, and various activities that we have undertaken with a whole range of partners around the world. I won't go into particular detail in relation to this framework, but you can see really 6 principal domains illustrated and highlighted on the screen. And these really represent, as emergent from our work, key impact and potential recovery and renewal action areas around which such efforts can be centred by local government and other agencies. Clearly, a lot of nuance and interpretation would be required in implementing the framework in local contexts, and obviously we are aware of that and as we've been developing the framework. This framework also helps structure the Manchester Briefing database, and so you will see a number of lessons later on highlighted relating to each of these domains. If we're thinking then in terms of some of those lessons and focal points, I've had the opportunity myself, but as well as other members of our team, to talk with a number of experts around the world in relation to their response and recovery activities. And that has included, of course, resilience officers from many cities. So if we consider, for example, those cities that have produced in the past resilience strategies and how those resilience strategies and the network itself has helped in informing recovery and renewal efforts during the pandemic, I think this slide really just draws out three of those particular ways in which those resilience strategies have informed recovery. You can also obviously see the front cover of the really excellent toolkit for resilient recovery, and that really echoes much of what resilience officers and others have been saying to us. So three of these particular areas, which I won't focus on in detail, but I think it's worth just elaborating briefly. So resilience officers, for example, have talked about the importance of assessing and analysing. So for example, applying and adapting the various tools and approaches such as impact assessments, social mapping of vulnerable people, scenario and action planning. They've also talked about the utilisation of data and intelligence in terms of working towards their recovery planning and using their pre-existing resilience strategies to inform that. So because of the existence of a resilience strategy, for example, those cities were well placed to prioritise recovery actions and also then use that as a basis to access resourcing, particularly from national governments. So for example, one resilience officer based in the United States talked about having already identified a lot of the vulnerabilities, and bearing in mind that those vulnerabilities were already there before the COVID crisis emerged, whether around the financial stress of individuals and households, whether around housing and homelessness, or whether around food security. Those particular needs were already there, but clearly they've been exposed further and exacerbated in the context of the pandemic. And through our conversations, it's also been apparent that many of the people involved in bringing together these recovery plans and renewal initiatives have also leveraged those pre-existing partnerships and networks. And so that has enabled them through kind of agile processes to use these relationships established pre-pandemic, to use the knowledge transfer networks, and to use then these tools such as the Manchester Briefing or the OECD excellent work around policy tracking to take on board these good practices during the crisis as they have been disseminated online in particular. If we think then about one of the particular lessons that we have covered in the Manchester Briefing, one concerns the circular economy, for example, and considering how to invest in a circular economy to promote healthier and more resilient cities. I again won't go into detail, but just seeing two particular recovery plans that have been published, one from Christchurch in New Zealand and the other from Manchester, that obviously talk about the circular economy and how actions will be centred around the circular economy in relation to implementing their recovery plans. And again, that is something that the Resilient Cities Network, for example, has touched upon in various resources and briefings online, including the infographic that I show on the screen. And to move then towards my final slide before wrapping up the presentation, another lesson which just featured on our most recent Manchester Briefing last week. And this, I guess, speaks to some of the challenges that many cities around the world will face in relation to the implementation of their recovery plans and renewal initiatives. And this particular lesson relates to funding models and necessity for those cities and local governments, etc., and also national governments in terms of enabling to consider new funding models to increase the opportunities for city recovery and resilience. And this particular lesson draws upon a UN Habitat report, which talks about, as you can see on the slide, the need for a changing financial model from today's system, based on essentially changing that pyramid where presently much of the city funding will come and will be based on intergovernmental transfers from national government, but really turning that on its head to try to ensure that cities have greater opportunities to generate their own revenues in future in order to really push forward more transformative processes in relation to recovery from the pandemic, and thinking about those kind of renewal initiatives that try to address some of those underlying inequalities. So this represents but one of the critical challenges I think that we face in co-designing a resilient recovery. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Andrew. That's really exciting and very informative lessons. Ilyara, you're up next. Are you ready to present?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you for the invitation on behalf of the Municipality of Milan. Okay, here we are. So I'm Ilaria Giuliani, and I'm the Deputy Chief Resilience Officer of the Municipality of Milan. I work with Piero Pellizzaro, the City Resilience Department, that is part of the Environmental Transition Department. We are here as City Resilience Department after the Municipality of Milan won the 100 Resilient City competition promoted by Rockefeller Foundation back in 2015. And then the municipality decided to create the department. We, of course, have been working through the years on the resilience strategy, and of course, like all the municipality, let's say, in different ways all around the world, have been working on the possibility of the chance to update our resilience strategy in the light of the pandemic and COVID-19. So we have been working on, let's say, different topics that are part of the resilience strategies, but there are as well other, there are strategic pillars as well of other big strategies and plans for the city of Milan. Here you can see three main topics on which let's say, the resilience strategy is based on, and on which is based as well the adaptation strategy the municipality decided to develop during the pandemic, not after. So, as I was saying, we as City Resilience Department are part of a bigger department, which is called Environmental Transition Department, which is quite new since it has been created within the municipality in 2019. And we are part of this department together with the climate and energy area and together with the water resources and environmental hygiene area. So these three, let's say, areas are working together towards the implementation of the environmental transition process the municipality has been starting within the year. We work keeping in our mind, let's say, this goal, this objective. There are equity, accessibility, renaturalization, decarbonization, and active participation. So our main, let's say, resilient methodology refers to the possibility to overlap different goals and different objectives that are, of course, related to the solutions to the climate change challenges that we all have to face, but as well, we are trying to overlap the topic of environment and the topic of sustainability together with more, let's say, social and economic perspective. In particular, looking at the possibility to solve the issue of inequalities that are part as well of the urban development of the city of Milan. So that's why we consider as well very much equity and accessibility in terms of services, but as well active participation, taking into consideration what citizens need. As I was saying, the municipality of Milan during the pandemic decided to publish an adaptation strategy that is called Strategia di Adattamento Adaptation Strategy, and we published this, let's say, in maybe May, 2020. And we keep this adaptation strategy open to collect comments of citizens. Again, that's why we consider active participation of citizens. So citizens during the pandemic, during the lockdown, Milan, but as well all Italy was facing, we asked citizens to give us their feedbacks. And those feedbacks has been taken into consideration in this adaptation strategy. Here you see which are the main pillars of this adaptation strategy. And I was saying this pillar has been, let's say, developed within this document, but starting from the strategies that were related to this topic in already existing plans of the municipality. That's why we decided to use this kind of chronological aspect, this timeline, in order to consider which are the main relation between the adaptation strategies for COVID-19 and other strategic documents of the municipality of Milan. The key point was that we were considering our plans as a real starting point to reconsider strategies and action and real action to face pandemic. That's why we decided to use the PGT, the Strategic Land Use Plan of the city, rather than the PUMS, which is the plans related to mobility. Then we went through the adaptation strategy, and we included within this plan as well the resilience strategy and as well the climate and air plan. And we used those plans to rescale the actions that were thought for, let's say, ordinary situation to manage the city, and we scaled those actions in order to reconsider them in the light of COVID-19. Here you see which is the structure of the resilience strategy we as City Resilience Department has been working on in the last year. The resilience strategy is based on three main pillars. The first one is related to services and procedure, so how we can imagine and implement new tools for implementing resilience, but as well for urban regeneration, for instance. The second pillar is related to spaces and infrastructure, so how we can promote and implement new public spaces within the city, public spaces that can be more adaptive to our changing conditions. And the third pillar is related to community and population. So again, how we can take into consideration inequality, how we can face them, how we can take into consideration as much as we can needs of citizens, of our Milanese citizens. So we took this structure of the resilience strategy and we applied, as I said, this structure within the adaptation documents. And some action actually came out, and I will give you some example in a few minutes. Another strategic plan we decided to consider in order to develop the adaptation strategy for COVID-19 is the Air and Climate Plan, which is now under approval by the City Council. So the plan has let's say it's considered very much strategic, since it has the capability to overlap strategies for mitigation to climate change, for adaptation to climate change, but as well for strategies related to the quality of air. It's the first time that the municipality develop a tool like this, a plan like this, and it's based again on 5 big thematic pillars. One is Slow Milano, which is related to mobility, of course. The other one is Positive Energy Milano, that is of course related to the use of energy, a more efficient use of energy, in the perspective of become a carbon neutral city. The third one is related to Cool Milano, so how we can renaturalize the city, how we can develop more green areas within the city. The fourth one is related to Inclusive Milan, so again, how we can provide a city that take into consideration as much as it can citizens and their needs. And the fifth one is related to informed citizens, so how we can implement the environmental transition process together with citizens. So we took this structure and we analyzed very much in details all the actions that were included in these 5 strategic pillars, and we used those actions in order to again update them in the light of COVID-19. And this is, let's say, more or less the structure of the Milano 2020 adaptation strategy. Of course, you need to consider that this strategy has been developed during the lockdown. And as I said, we left citizens the chance to comment and give their feedback to this adaptation strategy. So we review it, take into consideration their comments. It's based on this, let's say, 5 topics, 5 pillars again: governance, rights, and inclusion. So again, the topic of equity and accessibility. The economic resources and value pillars. The pillars are related to labor and job opportunities. Of course, the pillar related to sustainability, and again, all the work we have done with our resilience department and with our resilience strategies was included within this pillar, and the topic of timing, spaces, and services. I will give you some example of some action that we included within this adaptation strategy. But again, as I said, you need to consider that we developed this document during the lockdown, but trying to, let's say, have a vision as well on the possible, let's say, future that would have come after the lockdown, at least here in Milan and in Italy. So we try to consider, of course, a necessity, need of plans and, let's say, organize a post-lockdown phase, but as well to consider the fact that, of course, the pandemic would have some impacts on our everyday life for several years. So we are dealing within our strategy, and especially within the adaptation strategy, we are dealing with the new phase that we call new ordinary. So measures that need to be planned and implemented for somehow a new normality. Very quickly, just to give you some example of practical action we included within the adaptation strategy, the program Piazze Aperte. So starting from the fact that citizens, because of the pandemic, need more public space they can use, we open up some new squares within the city, removing cars and installing some benches and greenery. We decided to reduce the space for cars in order to implement much more bicycle lanes on big streets. Here you see some example. And in the last year, we developed 45 kilometers of new bike lanes. And this is, again, this is a way to give back the public space, the city, to citizens. We let commercial activities expand their spaces within the public space. Again, we remove cars from the streets in order to have more sidewalk and pedestrian areas where we can have green spaces, or we can have spaces for commercial activities, for bars and restaurants. Again, we left bars and restaurants using and occupy public space in order to encourage the use of the everyday life in the open air. And last but not least, we gave back the streets, removing cars to children, in order for them to have extraordinary spaces for both for playing, but as well for school activities, since schools were closed till this September. I think this was the last example. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ilia. It's really exciting to see how the city has reimagined and redesigned public space as a result of the pandemic, and it's something we've seen in a lot of our cities. Nazmul, I'd like to pass the mic on to you to help wrap up the panel. Thank you. Nazmul, I think you're still on mute. Just checking.
Yes, thank you. Sorry for the technical problem. It happens sometimes. So thank you very much, and my apologies for the short delay for this technical problem. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. And my name is Nazmul Haq, and I'm leading the ICLID's Resilient Development Program based in Bonn in World Secretariat. And many of you already know that ICLI is one of the biggest local government organizations, having the membership of 2,500 cities, towns, and regions under its membership. And the way we work very closely with the local political leadership to develop our vision and guidance. So that is why I'm also working as the portfolio liaison with 3 of the advisors who also advising us to define our political vision and leadership. So one of our advisors is Mayor Manuel de Araujo from the Quilimane city of Mozambique. Our second political co-chair is Mrs. Atishi Marlena, who is from member of National Capital Territory of Delhi, and also our advisor is Mr. Idris Harun from Malacca State Government of Malaysia. So the reason that I'm introducing it, because from our side at ICLI, we see resilience is not a very much technical issue, rather it's a combination of technical and political ambition. And being today by this presentation, I'm going to introduce some of the snapshots and approaches and activities of ICLI, how we are working with our member cities, towns, and regions to develop their resilience profile, their resilience, as well as help them to rise their climate ambitions, and also keeping green recovery and green approach and development at the very core of their development, overall development and resilience policies. So that is why our approach is very much, of course, local to global, and we always intentionally keep it local to global in terms of our resilience development strategies. It is because resilience is very much contextualized, and there cannot be any kind of global metric of resilience as opposed to mitigation or net zero carbon targets. So resilience is very complex, and we have very firm commitment to all of our member cities, not only to all of our member cities, but also other cities and towns and regions to rise their ambition to make a resilient towns and cities for them. So one of the major entry points we see that has been defined by Paris Climate Agreement, which is global goal of adaptation and subsequently resilient. But when we want to perform the global goal of adaptation and resilience, it has to be defined what resilience look like contextually in that particular context, or what capabilities the local government should have, or they require to develop their resilience profile, or how we can develop the local government metrics, and what instruments should be used to track and report progress at the global level. So that is how we are connecting. We are trying to answer all these questions and making a connection of resilience, which connects cities from local level to global level in terms of which can also contributing to develop what we call global goal of adaptation and resilience. So in doing so, what we are offering as a tool for the cities, that is what we call Green Climate Cities Program, which is of course beyond climate change, and it also very much inclusive, that is developed as a process methodology that helps us to understand, even for the cities, where we are in terms of our vulnerability, in terms of our risk, as well as in terms of our stock taking up capacity needs and everything. Then we also, the part of the methodology also includes like what should we do in terms of act, what we need to do to meet all the problems that we have identified in the earlier stage. It can include that we will redefine our approach. It can include that we will redefine our institutional setup and everything, and etc. Then thirdly, our approach is also advocating to accelerate, means where should we go, how should we go, and these approach is very much inclusive, that offers tailor-made solutions and suggestions to the needs of cities, towns, and regions, across the globe, and it helps cities to connect with the wider level of actors and institutions to meet their different level of needs and demands. So I can also show you two very brief examples how these tools are very much helping cities to rise their climate ambition and actions, but also towards the end, when the uncertainties took place, like COVID, that these frameworks also helps them to stand against the COVID and embrace the challenges. For example, as one of the local actions that where we applied this framework, 2 cities in Bangladesh under the urban-led project. One city is called Narayanganj and second city is called Rajshahi, where we have applied this framework and we identified what are the fragilities in their urban systems from different perspectives. As I said, the tool offers a very much inclusive view of what we need and what we have and what we need to do. So you see how the fragile urban system, definition of fragile urban system helps those cities subsequently to develop their resilience plan. Secondly, these once we identified through this framework that where we are and what we need, that it also help us to fill up the gap. For example, now as perhaps you have already heard from the other colleagues that we have been implementing a project through partnership with resilient cities and with GIZ from the funding from the BMZ, a project called RECAP, where we particularly address those gaps through green recovery and greener approaches. For example, in RECAP 21 project, we added solar street lighting in front of health centers for enhanced safety and security at night. At the same time, these utilization of this framework also helped us to take a pilot project to improve water and electricity accessibility in healthcare centers. And if in effect, what the benefits we got, it's also helped cities to develop their adaptation profile, to develop their resilience profile in form of rainwater harvesting, mitigating the water shortage. But at the same time, it also has helped them to decrease the cost of lighting, reduce energy cost in the long term, generate local revenue, and reduce and avoided greenhouse gas emissions. So this is how an innovative and an inclusive local level approach from ICLEI really helped to include the green recovery philosophies and activities inside an overarching resilient development framework. So now our target, as we said, that bringing these lessons to a global level so that we can have a global level of understanding how resilience should work and what contextualities we should consider. And as of 3 of our main approaches, you can see here on the screen that we are very much a proud member of Cities Race to Resilience, where we are leading one particular initiative called Cities Race to Resilience. And these races are being promoted by the climate champions, and we are very much proud that we are part of this races. Again, we are also very much a founding partner of NCR 2030, which is forwarded by UNDRR, and also we are a member of Global Covenant of Mayors, one of the biggest organizations as well on adaptation and resilience. So these organizations are some of the vehicles through which we are also transferring lessons. We are reporting data and everything so that local level actions, local level best practices and partnerships can be easily transferable and be reported to make a global goal of adaptation and resilience. So this is my short take here, and I'm very much grateful again for the opportunities, and for the more information, please feel free to contact us. Thank you very much and have a nice evening and nice afternoon.
So thank you very much for all this information and this material that I think will be very useful for many of us. And of course, ICLEI is really a great contributor to this agenda of resilience. I'm not sure, I don't think we'll have time for a question and answer, but I still would like to get everybody back on screen. And maybe say a few words about the presentation. I must say, Soo-Jin, I love your almost your slogan of smart, green, and inclusive, because I think that summarizes what we all aspire to in these recovery program. One thing that struck me in what you said, and I think everybody mentioned in one way or another, is that most of these recovery programs built on work done before the crisis. Right? These are not the result of a certain interest in resilience. The crisis certainly helped advance some of these efforts, but they really build on foundation that have been laid over the years by organizations like ICLEI, like RCN, like others who are present here today. Andrew, you also mentioned that very much a lot of these, the vulnerability that emerged during crisis existed before. Very often a crisis just brings them to the fore and makes them realized. And Ilaria, you showed very well how you really built on a multitude of plans that then allowed for the current recovery plan to emerge. I think another element that everybody underscores the importance of inclusivity, of consultation in those plans, and that the plans that work best are the ones that really are done in a consultative manner. Now, you can only, I mean, all these plans, and we know it from experience, are done on an accelerated process, right? It may take time to get these investments through, but they usually are done extremely quickly. And unless there's all these foundations in place that can allow for a consultative process to take place in a fairly quick pace, it's very difficult to build some of these plans. And I think, Namsul, you put your finger on the crux of the matter, that there are multiple dimensions to resilience, and in fact, resilience is not just a technical problem; it's a political one that is built over the years. And again, credit to everybody present, and especially some of the organizations who have been supporting this agenda. Donna, I'm going to pass it back to you. It's 9:57, so I'll leave it to you to close. Unfortunately, without question, but I think we're happy to put you in touch with the speakers, and we're happy to facilitate dialogue to anybody who wants to get connected. Thank you very much to all the speakers and to all the participants.
Thank you so much, Francis. I wanted to take this opportunity to once again thank Felix Döhler as well and GIZ for their partnership and investment in this really important work of really learning from cities how to plan for a resilient recovery. And so again, we have been very excited to be part of this process with ICLEI and GIZ to really go deep in a few cities in Bangladesh and Rwanda and Mauritania, and to really learn some, how cities are approaching recovery in different and new ways, and in the smart, green, equitable, and multi-sectoral ways. So thank you again, Felix. Thank you again to all the speakers and the panelists. I wanted to remind everyone that within the next week, all of the materials from the session will be available online. So if you're interested in going back to the slides and this recording of the session, that will be available within the week. And I wanted to invite you all to rejoin us on October 14th for the next session, where we'll be continuing this theme and diving deeper into some of the findings from this Recap 21 program, and some of I think Nazmul gave us a taste of some of the projects that are emerging from this work, and we'll be going deeper into the learnings from those projects, and talking about how cities are designing and also financing these projects, and coming up with new and innovative ways to approach recovery. So please join us again for part 2 of this conversation, and thank you again for all being here with us today. We look forward to seeing you on October 15th. Thank you, and have a pleasant evening and day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Take care.